Welcome to all in the room and on Zoom to our second seminar of the Aphasia CRE Seminar series. I'm Caroline Baker from La Trobe University, co-facilitator of the seminar series. We've had another overwhelming response to this seminar, which is great. We warmly welcome you near and far, and we are delighted to have Professor Sabine Corsten as our international visitor and speaker today. Before I introduce Sabine, I'd like to cover some housekeeping. And as we embrace the use of technology throughout the presentation today, please be patient, as you have been to begin with, and bear with us as we gather up to 100 attendees via many Zoom links. Some may join us a little later in the session, so apologies in advance if there are any disruptions to your viewing. To enhance your experience of the use of Zoom and avoid any distractions during the presentation today, please mute your microphone, turn off your video and minimise the Zoom gallery. Thank you. This seminar is being recorded and we will be, and this will be available to access on our website. If you click on the resources tab and go to webinars. Videos are usually uploaded 1 to 2 weeks after each seminar. Questions for this seminar will be aided by the use of Slido. You can log in anonymously or with your name and you'll be able to see all the questions put forward by other audience members. Give it a go. It's a great way to engage with the presentation experience and allows you to ask questions online so you can concentrate on the presentation. Our event code is 6629. Enter your questions under the questions tab anytime during the presentation. And if you like a question, click on the thumbs up button and this will show us the most burning of questions that Sabine will answer towards the end. And please engage with us on social media today via Twitter and Facebook. Feel free to tweet along to Sabine's presentation. So I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Professor Sabine Corsten from the Catholic University of Applied Sciences in Mainz, Germany. Sabine is a speech-language therapist with extensive experience in research, teaching and clinical practice. She has been awarded 1.3 million euros, which is just over 2 million Aussie dollars, in competitive grants to fund aphasia research projects. And these include projects in biographic narrative therapy, support groups, and tally therapy. Sabine has also produced 34 high-quality publications, and Sabine is a visiting scholar in the Aphasia CRE based here at La Trobe University for the month of September. This is Sabine's second visit to Australia and we're thrilled she's back. Sabine will generously share her knowledge and experiences of implementing a biographical narrative approach for aphasia into different settings. Thank you, Sabine.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Caroline, and thank you for the invitation to present my work here. I'm really very happy to be back in Australia for the second time now. And yeah, you already said it, I talk about my research, and this is about using the biographical narrative approach to improve quality of life in aphasia. And it's about a kind of life storytelling to make people realize their own strengths and to stimulate coping processes regarding aphasia. And we were able to look at this approach in different settings, and I decided today to give you a kind of overview over my work. And before I start, I show again where Mainz is. And it's still in the middle of Germany, close to Frankfurt. It's not such a big city. And you can see here a picture of my university. I think I always choose this one because you can see the cherry trees in the spring, and I like this time of the year very much at my university. So, what do I want to talk about? I already said I want to give you an overview. I will tell you a bit about the theoretical background of my work, about the narrative approach, and then I will give you an overview over the projects. I know some of you will be or are already familiar with the narrative approach, but I think it's a good thing to give a short introduction to this again, as it is the basis for all the other projects. I will focus on the Schalk project. This is about using the narrative approach in support groups. And you are the first ones. I present the data, so yeah, I'm a bit proud that we have the results now. And then, of course, I give you some conclusions, and in the outlook, I want to tell a bit about the new project, the current project, and the future project we are working on, and these are about telehertz, yes. So looking at the starting point for all of this work, we looked at the quality of life of people of aphasia or with aphasia in the literature, and what we found, and I think this is not a surprise, that it's significantly worse in comparison to healthy persons. But it's also significantly worse in comparison to persons with brain lesions without aphasia. And it's even significantly worse than in persons with other chronic diseases, like, for example, Alzheimer's disease or cancer. You find numbers like that there are 60% of the people with aphasia show signs of depression 1 year post-onset. And there's other literature that shows that neither the language improvement nor the language skills really predict the outcome and quality of life. So this means that we have to do, or that we have to find additionally to the linguistic therapy methods to help these people to cope with the new condition. And qualitative research shows that the subjective burdens are about a loss in autonomy, about social isolation, and about a change in the sense of identity. So people describe themselves as stigmatized. They have a more deficit-oriented view on themselves. And this was the starting point for our work. And we looked at social cultural theories, and we looked at the concept of identity. And here you can find the concept of narrative identity, which is a very flexible construct, and it's constantly newly created using life narratives in dialogue with others. So you need biographic narrative competences for this. This means you need the ability to mediate identity in social interaction with others. By doing this, people are able to integrate critical life events, like a chronic disease, but also like a wedding, into their life, and they can adjust to the situation. And this results, this identity work, in an optimal development of a sense of agency, of coherence, and also of meaningfulness in life. And as meaningfulness in life is very closely connected to quality of life, this means it also leads to an optimal outcome and quality of life. Now looking at the situation in case of aphasia, you can easily imagine that aphasia especially asks for this kind of identity work, because aphasia is described as a kind of biographical disruption. So everyday activities, but also aims and perspectives are disrupted, and Barbara Shedden, she even talks about identity theft in case of aphasia. And I can already say all our work is really inspired by Barbara Shedden's approach. So the difficulty now in case of aphasia is these people need this kind of identity work, but because of the decreased narrative competences, it's difficult. There's a barrier in this kind of self-work, which results in a poor self-image and a decrease in quality of life. So now, looking at the biographic narrative intervention, this might be a possibility to give people with aphasia the opportunity to do this necessary life storytelling. And our task is to support the narrative competences to give these people the room to do this life storytelling with the aim to change the sense of self into a more resource-oriented sense of self, and of course to improve quality of life. Looking now what you can find in the literature, which kind of evidence we find for this kind of work. Biographic narrative work in case of aphasia is done in face-to-face individual settings or approaches. These are professionally led, and the idea is that by telling the life story, identity renegotiation processes are stimulated, and this lead to psychological health. There is the work from Barbara Shedden, but also from a Scandinavian group around Bronten, and there's also the work from Strong based on Barbara Shedden's ideas. And these work shows this work can improve quality of life. However, for example, the approach of Bronten was part of a more general rehabilitation program, so it's difficult to find the specific working mechanism. And the work of Shedden and Strong is only evaluated in a qualitative way. So we thought maybe we can also look at this with quantitative measurements. The other approach to do this life storytelling is to do it in group approaches. Psychosocial support groups can improve quality of life or can improve social participation. And here, this is mostly a kind of mixture. So people do a kind of life storytelling, but they also do this by, or they use meaningful activities to change their self of sense, to get a feeling of agency and feel empowered and to improve their self-efficacy. So this is more a mixture of different approaches. Now I introduce it to my first project. The narrative approach, and here we use this kind of live storytelling in a combination of individual sessions and group sessions, and they were all led by professionals. I will summarize this a bit because a lot of people here know this program. We did this, oh my god, 5 years ago, so we ended the program in 2014, and we wanted to know, can we really improve quality of life in people with chronic aphasia by using this approach, and can we show this with quantitative measurements? And we wanted to learn a bit more about the working mechanisms, so we asked if there are change in identity, and therefore we make use of interviews. Okay, a bit about the intervention. So we made use of two kind of settings here, and in the individual settings, we used the biographic narrative interview. This is originally a social scientific research tool, but it was shown that it has a kind of therapeutic effect, so we decided, okay, we use it as a kind of intervention. As you can see, it includes two phases. The first phase is about the main narration, so people were asked, tell us your life story, we don't interrupt you. We didn't focus on the illness narrative, so people could choose what they wanted to talk about. The second phase was about different kinds of questions, so we asked imminent questions about things that were only shortly mentioned during the story, like an important person or something like this. We also asked exminent questions here about, for example, resources or helpful things after having the stroke. So these were very resource-oriented, coping-oriented questions. During the group intervention, according to biography work, the guiding principle was to deal with specific topics regarding the past, the present, and the future. And here the topics were introduced by our researchers because we wanted to give people with severe aphasia the opportunity to prepare the group meetings beforehand. So this was a bit different in comparison to the individual sessions. We made use of different aids like written language, but especially we used pictograms, as you can see here, about specific life stages. I like this H1 very much. But we also had pictograms about specific actions, places, people, so we were able to stimulate stories by using these pictograms. The study took place in a pre- and post-test design with a follow-up assessment after 3 months. For participant selection, we made use of the Aachen Aphasia test and the geriatric depression scale, and we excluded people with severe difficulties in speech perception and with signs of depression, because we wanted to make sure that it's not a psychological kind of therapy. During the intervention, 5 face-to-face interviews, as I showed you, and 7 group sessions took place. All lasted for about, I think, 90 minutes. People were assessed with a battery of tests, and we looked at the cognitively and effectively based life evaluation. I will show the tests to you because we also used them in the following project. And at the end, we made use of semi-structured interviews to learn more about the perspective of the participants. So all the tests were self-assessment tests, and our primary outcome measure was the Aachen Life Quality Inventory. It's maybe comparable to the SAQOL 39, but it includes a lot more items. As you can see, 17 items in 4 categories, and we have 2 scores. People are asked to judge complaints, like, I think I have an example, yes, like often alone to be true or not true. And in case there is a complaint, then they have to weight this on a second score, on the burden score, and they have to decide it doesn't matter if it's bad or very bad. Then we made use of the satisfaction with life scale, and we wanted to look at the cognitively based life satisfaction. And people had to indicate their agreement to sentences or statements like, I'm satisfied with my life, on a 7-point Likert scale from I totally agree to I totally don't agree. We used this kind of test as a control test to control for social desirability, so we didn't expect any improvement in this test, because this is a very stable measure, and even people after a head injury don't show any change in this measurement. And finally, we made use of the visual analog mood scales to look at the effective evaluation, and here you have 8 scales like this, and people have to indicate their mood, and you can convert this into T-scores. So, of course, we hypothesized an improvement in quality of life. This was the aim of the study. We also expected a change in mood, measured by the visual analog mood scales. As I already said, we didn't expect any change in the satisfaction with life scale. And of course, we had the idea that all this should be due to a change in the kind of self-perception. We were able to include, during this 3 years, 27 people with aphasia. They were in the middle 61-year-old. They were all in the chronic phase, as you can see, about 5 years post-onset. 15 male and 12 female persons, and the severity level ranged from mild to moderate in case of aphasia. Oops. Okay. Now we can already see the results, and you can see in the complaints as well as in the burden score there was an improvement in quality of life from pre to post test. So there's an increase in these data, and this means this is an improvement in quality of life. And this even went on from post-test to follow-up. So this was a really stable increase in quality of life. And this, of course, was in accordance with our expectations, with our hypothesis. And these changes in the total score were based on changes in almost every category, as you can see. Looking at the other results, now you have to believe me because I don't show any figures and I don't have time to show all the figures. There was a mild to moderate increase in positive moods like happiness and a decrease in negative moods like tension or something like this. And there was, as expected, no change in this life satisfaction judgment. And we interpreted this as a really specific therapy effect we found looking at the other measurements. So of course we wanted to know how did this happen, what happened to these participants in our study, and to look at the working mechanism, we used these interviews I already mentioned. So we asked about the experience with the intervention, but also about feelings after the intervention, and also about or about the look at themselves. So here you can see some examples of our questions. For example, what is now important to you? Or a very difficult one, how do you see yourself now? And we analyzed this based on ground theory methodology. And here you can see the results of this. We found 4 main themes, and to us they are very closely connected to identity. So the first one is about agency, and this means people said something about believing in making one's own decisions. So they thought they are able to take their own decision now. And you can see a quote here, well, I realized that I'm able to set priorities now. This was not possible at the beginning of this narrative intervention. We found also quotes about the disease concept, which means about the emotionally and cognitively based perception of the illness. And people were still aware, of course, of their aphasia, but they were able to relativize this in comparison to other group members. And also they made the experience in the one-to-one sessions that they were able to tell their story and that there was somebody who listened to them. The next theme is about control, and yeah, this is about getting the sense that you can adjust to the disease, that you are able to make new decisions, that you are able to find new aims, even with having this new condition or in this new condition. And here you can see a quote, getting to know other participants relativized my feelings of satisfaction. I know how well I get along with my disease. And finally, the 4th theme is a bit different because this was more about activities. So people talked about doing activities again, meaningful activities. So identity renegotiation took place here through meaningful activities. And mostly people started doing things they already did before the stroke, but now they felt they can do it again. And I think this is shown by this quote. Before being part of the project, I didn't care about other people, but I learned that I should email, and then I did, and I visited someone, and now I will go on. So I think this shows that this change in identity also resulted in new activities or former activities that people did again. So it shows there is also a change in the activity pattern. So looking at our conclusions, we found treatment-specific significant improvement in quality of life that was stable. And there was, we also looked at their language skills. There was really no change in their language skills. So I think this change we found is really due to a change in their sense of self and their identity feeling. And there was a more positive self-attribution that led to this change in quality of life. And I think this is also could also be seen in the qualitative data. Then we thought, how can we integrate this approach in usual care? Because in Germany, mostly speech and language therapy is about linguistic training. So it's very difficult to integrate this kind of work in the usual or traditional speech and language therapy. And we thought maybe we can start with doing it in support groups. Here people feel more free to try new things. And we started this new project. It's called Schalk. You always need new acronyms in Germany. And you always have to create new slides. So now we have a new style guide, and I started with this new project. And I already told you it's about support groups, so people with aphasia. And again, of course, we wanted to improve quality of life, and we wanted to use now this biographic narrative approach in a less structured way. And we ended with this project in June this year, so we had again 3 years time, and it's really brand new what I tell now. We wanted to develop a training for peer leaders here to enable them to run the groups, but also to enable them to use these biographic topics in the group. This is very new, especially in Germany, because mostly these groups, these support groups, are led by speech and language therapists in Germany, and we wanted to change this. And of course we wanted to evaluate all this work and wanted to look at the quality of life in the leaders and in the participants of the support groups. To give you a short overview over the background, here's a short definition about support groups. Of course, they provide a kind of place for accessing peer support. And the aim is to increase coping processes and to increase a kind of common, of shared experience. And there's already literature that shows that people with aphasia really benefit from group work. It led, for example, to significantly higher levels in social participation, and the social isolation is perceived significantly less in these cases. What we found is that peer-led support groups might even increase this benefit because they kind of foster a shared ownership, so the participants are no longer passive recipients, and they seem to experience the peer leaders as a kind of stimulating role model. And we thought, so okay, we want to make use of this and we want to change the leading position. Yes, and I already told you this is a bit difficult because most of these groups are led by speech and language therapists, and I think it's not only in Germany like this. So we changed 3 key elements in this work, looking at the support groups. We changed the organization. I told you about the change in leadership. Often these groups, and this is also shown in the literature, are about informal meetings, drinking a coffee, organizing the next meeting. And we wanted to structure this a bit more and to give them an idea how they can use this live storytelling a bit more structured than they did this in this informal approaches. And one final thing we changed, we worked on the group composition because in Germany mostly these groups are mixed groups, so people with aphasia and carers take part in them together. And we found that this is a difficult situation often for the people with aphasia because the carers talk a lot and it's difficult for people with aphasia to get their part of the discussion. So we decided to separate them. We conceptualized a training for these peer leaders and co-leaders, and this is based on work we did in a pilot study. So we had data from focus groups, we had data from interviews, we had observation data from group meetings because we wanted to know what do these groups do and what do they want to do. And the training was finally based on elements of empowerment didactics, which means this focused really on shared decision making, so people were asked what they want to learn, and it focused on making the experience you can do it. So we did a lot of role plays, exercises, things like this. And we wanted to stimulate, by doing this, learning on 4 different levels. On a cognitive level, people should get some knowledge about group work. What are the aims of the group? How can they work? What are the rules? On an organizational or skills level, we worked on things like how do you introduce the people to the group? How do you make sure they know what is going to happen? And I think the most important levels were the last ones, the social communicative level. This was all about moderation techniques, because we wanted them to, we wanted them to show that they can stimulate the discussion and that they really can foster the conversation. And maybe even more important was the affective level, to give the participants the experience, or to make sure that they have the experience that they can do it, that they can really lead the discussion, and that they have a sense of self-efficacy in the situation. And this was the reason why we trained a lot during this 3 days. This all ended in 4 modules, as you can see, and the first one was about this knowledge and organizational things, about looking at the aims of the groups. The second and the third module, yes, were about the moderation, and here we also introduced parts of the biographic work, what might be important topics, what might be important questions, resource-oriented questions, things like this. And the last one was about conceptualizing single meetings, especially the first one, because we wanted to make sure that the participants of the training had an idea how to start the first meeting after the training, so to make sure they can adjust to their new role, that they are the leaders now, and that the others really could expect them as the leaders. Here's the study design. We were able to work with 9 intervention groups, and the training or the intervention took place in a pre- and post-test study with a follow-up assessment after half a year. And we included 5 control groups. These were already existing support groups led by speech and language therapists. So this is kind of usual care in Germany. Looking now a bit more in detail at this design, you can see, I don't touch it, you can see the training phase again. And then this is followed by a kind of support phase. Here 6 meetings took place over 6 months, because these groups meet monthly. And during this first phase, 4 out of the 6 meetings were supervised by researchers, so they supported the leaders and they could ask questions, for example, if there was a problem. Then there was another 6-month phase, so-called continuation phase, and we decreased the support here, so the leaders could make phone calls, and we prepared the sessions with them, but we didn't visit the sessions or the meetings. Yes, and the independent phase, of course, was about doing it really on your own and only calling us in an emergency case, and try to do this with the group. Parallel to this, there were also meetings of the relatives, but I don't talk about this today because I think it would be too much. As you can see, the control groups had the same time points of measurements. Every 6 months, we used again the Aachen Life Quality Inventory to look at the change in quality of life. But we also made use of videography of the first 6 and 12 meetings to look at the interaction pattern in the group, if there might be a change, for example. So again, we expected an improvement in quality of life. And here, especially in the total scores, you remember this yes, no, and the scale. It's bad, it's not bad. And of course in the psychosocial score of the RQE, we expected a change. We were able to include from these 9 groups, support groups, 40 persons in an intention to treat analysis. The mean age of the people was 62 years. They were all in the chronic phase, as you can see. And we had 29 male persons, and of course the other persons were female. The degree of impairment ranged from mild to severe, and you can see there were 11 people with really severe aphasia in the groups, because this was really research in the field, and these people were already in the groups. Maybe I should tell you, of these 9 groups, 7 already existed before we started the intervention. They were led by speech and language therapists before we changed the situation, and 2 groups were initiated by us. Control group, the control group included 20 people from these 5 control groups we worked with. They were almost 60 years old. They also were all in the chronic phase of aphasia, and you can see there was one person with aphasia for really a long time. 9 of these people were male. And here we had 8 people with severe aphasia in these groups. Looking at the results, we had these 4 points of measurement, you remember, and what we found is that there is a significant improvement here in the complaint score, in the overall score, from the first assessment to the second assessment. So there's an improvement in this support phase I talked about. And this improvement, as you can see, was stable over all the other times of measurement. And this is true for the complaints total score and also for the complaints psychosocial score, so as we expected it. And this is similar for the burden score. And now I show you the results of the control groups, and you can see that you can see almost nothing. So this is really a different pattern here. There was no significant improvement. Only one, and this complains the total score, there's a change, but there was even a decrease in quality of life in some of these scores. So we thought maybe it's due to a difference in the first test, so maybe there's a difference at the baseline. And when we look at the baseline scores of the intervention group and the control group, then there's no significant difference in the total scores or in the psychosocial scores. So this means our effects are not due to ceiling effects, for example, in the control group. And in accordance to this, the differences between the first assessment and the second assessment were significantly different for these measurements. So, of course, there was a greater improvement in the intervention groups, as you can see. So we also looked, in addition to this, at the interaction pattern in the group, and now you can see results, really preliminary results from a master thesis we did about the roles of the leaders and the co-leaders in the groups. And this is based only on the videos of 2 groups, because we didn't have enough time to prepare this. And we had 4 video recordings here, which we included. I think this is about 17% of the sample. So we selected different parts of the videos where we made sure that there took really place a kind of turn-taking, so it was not the introduction, for example, of the meeting. And this was analyzed based on the qualitative structuring content analysis. And I only show you the data in a short version here. So we defined different shares of discussion of the leader and the co-leader. So there was, for example, a kind of commenting behavior, like asking questions when somebody in the group told about a specific topic. There was also a kind of initiatory behavior, like coordinating the topics, or like telling somebody, now it's your turn, can you answer please? And an emotionalizing behavior, like using humor, for example. And what you can see is that the amount of questions increases while this coordinating behavior decreases. So we thought maybe this shows that over the time the peer leaders really achieve a more balanced kind of group interaction, and it's less directive than we might expect it to be with professional leaders. But I don't have the data of professional groups, so I can't tell this. Looking at the conclusion here, so we found a significant and stable increase in quality of life over all the phases of our intervention, and this was only true for the intervention groups, not for the control groups. There's a first tendency that shows us there is a change in communication, looking at the behavior of the leaders and co-leaders. Yeah. Maybe you can also think they fall back into their old roles, and this is why they are less coordinating, but that's another kind of interpretation. But I think it shows that these peer-led groups can really be successful. So people with aphasia can do it, contradictory to some beliefs some speech and language therapists might have. What is really necessary is, in our experience, that the training is flexible and very practical, because we tried, for example, to introduce some types of questions, and then we used, as an example, a specific topic, and people really started to reflect on the topic, not on the questions. And I think this is what you have to keep in mind, that you have to give them time, because then they want to talk about the subject and not about this technique that you want to teach. I also think that an ongoing support is helpful, so for organizational things, and this also already leads to the future ideas. So I think a refresher workshop might be necessary after a while to look at the problems they experienced in their journey with the group. Ongoing supervision, maybe also multidisciplinary support, looking at the different people in these groups. One big problem was, that's also described in the literature, integrating people with severe aphasia. So maybe it's necessary to have a kind of communication training for the leaders, and maybe in the best world also for the members of the groups, to make sure that they can support each other. And of course we have a lot of qualitative data we want to analyze. Do I have 4 more minutes? Yeah. Okay, this was about the Shark project. And I started with this idea we can use the approach in different settings. And I think these 2 projects show that you can really make use of the approach in, for example, professionally led individual sessions, but also in peer-led groups. And I think it depends how much you structure the approach. So you can use it with people with severe aphasia, I think, and maybe also with people with signs of depression. And then you need a multidisciplinary team and you need a more structured approach. But looking at people in support groups, I think this project shows you can use the biographic approach also in a less structured way, led by peers. You can train to use the method. Looking at the future settings, we start with a new program next week without me. And this is about using this approach in long-term residential aged care, so in nursing homes. It's easier for me to say. And we want to work here with text, so we use a kind of tablet support method here to improve, again, quality of life. This idea came up when we saw that about 1/3 of the older people in Germany that need care are already live in nursing homes, and I think this number will increase. And we also know that people who have to adjust to this new living situation show also signs of depression. The numbers are really high, about 60%. And we thought, okay, we want to use the opportunity to support people in this last phase of their life. And then we talked to people in nursing homes, and we saw there's really a shortage in staff. So the solution was to work with volunteers, also older people who of course don't live in a nursing home, but they might be a good role model for these old people in the nursing homes, and might help to make sure that the technology is accepted. And the technology should be used as a kind of method kit for these volunteers, so they can use the app on the tablet and they see these important questions we talked about, topics, and maybe if people have a problem in communication, they can show the pictograms to the residents and stimulate the discussion by this. This is planned for 3 months, yes. 12 sessions should take place. And here again, as you can see in this figure about the design, we use a group intervention. So these volunteers should work with 3 or 4 older people in a group. And we also include control groups. At the moment we plan to work in these control groups also with tablets, but using games. But I know we already discussed maybe we change this a bit. And we additionally will make use of individual interventions for people who can't, who have to stay in bed and who can't leave their rooms. And now I'm almost ready. Here you can see examples of the app. And before I left Germany, I got some good news that we can also start another project in January using this approach. And this project is inspired by the work of Annie Hill and her colleagues, and she also collaborates with us in this project. And here we want to use the approach similar to the one in the original narrative project, but here we want to use a video conference system to overcome, for example, mobile hindrances so that people can take part in the intervention from their home places. So we will have a lot of work here to develop the platform, and then we want to evaluate this, of course, looking again at the quality of life, and also if it's possible that these people also build a kind of relationship using this technology. So this is what we're going to do in the future. Okay, I think the time is okay. So first of all, of course, thanks to all the participants in these projects, and it was really hard to find them, and I think it was also hard for them to come to all these meetings. Thanks to both teams, to the one of the first project and to the Schalk team. And of course, thanks to you for your attention and for the invitation again. I want to say a special thank to Linda Worrell, because I think this visit 2 years ago was really a bit of a life-changing experiences, and this initiated all this future work. So yeah, thank you, Linda. And this is again a bit about the place where I live. It's really a nice place. And I think this comes also. Years ago we had some snow. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sabine. We've got time for a couple of questions. So I'll just bring up questions on Slido.
Caroline, do you want me to share?
I think it's coming up.
Go to the button.
It's just thinking about it. Can you see that, Kelly? Does anyone have the questions handy?
Yes.
Here's also
Thank you.
something on this.
Ah, here we are. It's not showing on our screen, but I'll just read them out for you. Thanks so much, Sabine, for that inspirational talk. We've got a vote of 8 here for the changes post-therapy are exciting. What are the active ingredients of the intervention? What are the time and space requirements to explore evolving identity? Do you need a specific counselling skill?
I think they were, that's my question. I was asking about the active ingredients of the intervention. Is it just time and space to explore this identity and how it's evolving, or are there specific counselling skills that are used?
Mm-hmm. Looking at the narrative approach, it was really about giving the space to explore your identity. It was really non-directive. When I look at the interviews, it was like, tell your story, and then we listened to the story and we asked these questions, but it was never like, oh, you're talking about social isolation, so maybe it's a good idea to go to a support group or something like this.
Yeah.
So the idea was that the participants find the solution on their own. And I think I forgot to tell this when we looked at the design of the study. There were 2 weeks during the intervention without intervention to make sure they had some time to reflect on the intervention and on the processes we started. And when we look at the results, as I told you, there was an ongoing improvement when we look at the follow-up data. And I think this is because this kind of process of reflection went on. So people need time for this. And I think it's almost difficult the way we did it. So now we have this 10 weeks and let's put this all in this 10 weeks. So I think it's really about starting this journey of reflection. And this is also why I think that we need maybe, and we discussed this, a more directive approach when we include people with maybe a mild depression. So then it might be good to have another kind of counseling in addition to our approach. But we wanted to work with people without any signs of depression. So, and what was your second question? Specific counseling skills. I think this is almost answered now. We worked with speech and language therapists, and the skill they really needed was to support the narrative, so to make sure people were able to tell their story. For example, use this pictograms. We had people with severe apraxia of speech, and they told the story only by using the pictograms. And there were also some details we knew about the people after this. For example, somebody told us he had a dog and the name of the dog and all these details about his animal. And I think this was an important skill, and the other important skill was to be patient, because when I did it, I always wanted to help and to support and to go on with the language, and I think you need the patience to wait when there, for example, were finding difficulties. But nobody had a specific training in any kind of counseling or psychotherapy or something like this. Does this answer the question?
Perfect. Yep.
Thank you. We'll ask you just one more, Sabine. Do narrative competencies include both production and reception considerations? And would this model work for people with receptive aphasia and semantic difficulties? Just got a minute.
Yes, it includes both skills, but maybe it already became clear that it's easier to overcome severe difficulties in speech production because of all these aids we introduced to the people. But you need at least a moderate skills in speech perception. Otherwise, it's so difficult to do this kind of conversation.
Thank you. Now, just going back, we thank you so much for today. And thank you everyone who has attended and asked questions via Slido. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but do feel free to get in touch with Sabine or us at the Aphasia CRE, and we can link you up. We welcome your feedback on Slido also via the polls tab. And we look forward to seeing you again next month on Wednesday the 25th of September. We have Professor Mike Dickey from the University of Pittsburgh joining us, and he'll talk to us about person-specific and practice-related predictors of naming treatment response in aphasia. So thank you everyone, and thank you Sabine very much. Hi Sabine, thank you for joining us to answer a few more questions from the seminar last week. I'll just share the screen so that we can see what those questions were. Did your participants focus within their narratives on what had happened to them around their brain injury and aphasia?
Let me think. A lot of our participants focused on their illness narratives, but not all of our participants. I think it depended on the severity of their speech problems. So people with really severe speech problems, they started their narrative with their aphasia journey, but other people talked really about very different topics, like the death of their mother or something like this. And these were things that happened in the past many years ago, but this was this was what was really important to them. So it was very individual, and there were big differences between the important things between the people. And we didn't force them to tell about the aphasia. So there were even people who didn't mention their aphasia.
Okay, great, thank you. Do you plan to compare the outcomes following this narrative therapy plus groups with a control group involving participation in community aphasia groups only?
As I said during the talk, we already tried to work with peer-led support groups concentrating on life narratives, and here we compare this approach to the usual care, to professionally led support groups, but we don't plan to compare these data to the original narrative data, because I think these are very different settings. And I think when I ended the talk, I talked about these different settings and also about the different needs of structuring the approach. So I think it makes no sense to compare this professionally led kind of narrative therapy to the work in support groups. So yeah, I hope this answers the question.
Yeah. Are the narratives participants are working on purely verbal or supported by AAC? Yeah, Leanne says, I'm curious how especially severe expressive difficulties are supported in the peer-led groups.
Yes, in the peer-led groups, as we did in the narrative approach, we also work with pictograms, and of course we ask people to use written language or gestures. And people with severe problems in speech production, they used this pictograms because this was the main aids we introduced to them. We also used some worksheets, and I think I talked about this. Some people had, after this intervention or after taking part in the support group, kinds of life diaries with pictograms showing important persons, showing important places to them, or showing important activities. But you have to keep in mind, if you use all these aids, then you have a more chronological life story, and it's not like people start with the most important thing because you try to support them, and then it's more really like a chronological biography.
Okay, thank you. Let's have a look. Why do changes in quality of life and self-perception not predict changes in life satisfaction?
This is a very good question. And this question is more about the theoretical background. And maybe it's important to know that quality of life is more like an umbrella term. So it's a very, it's a concept with more dimensions, and it's about objective factors, for example, health or social interaction, but also about the subjective evaluation of these factors. And so looking at the measurements now and at this question, you can look at, for example, health-oriented quality of life, and then you ask people how they evaluate their health, their life situation relating to the illness. And then you have this part called subjective well-being, and this is about long-term cognitively based evaluations, like I'm satisfied with my life up to now, I achieved all the goals I thought I would achieve. And you have this short-term, more emotionally based evaluation about all-day moods. I'm happy and maybe I will be tired after answering the question, but tomorrow this is different. And so these are all different parts of this umbrella construct, quality of life. And so, of course, there is a relationship between, or these concepts interact, but they are not the same. Maybe one last example, there are studies about people who don't have work. And these people, of course, when you ask them about their cognitively based life satisfaction, they are not satisfied with the situation because they expected their life to be different. But when you ask them about their all-day mood, they are often more happy than people who have to go to work because they are flexible. They can decide what they want to do during the day. And this shows these are different concepts. And from the literature, we know it's easier to change these all-day moods or to change this health-oriented quality of life than to change this cognitively based life satisfaction. And I think this explains why we expected different improvements in these areas.
Oh, thank you for explaining that. Good. And did your participants focus within their narratives on their aphasia alone, or were there other topics that were the focus? You've covered that a little bit already.
I think it's like the first.
Yes. And did the narrative study evaluate changes in use of pharmacological treatments of depression?
I can't answer this because we didn't look at the drugs or the medicine people took, but we only included people with maybe mild signs of depression. So I think even if we look at the data now, it's almost impossible for us to find this because there were no people with really depression. But it would be interesting to go on with this.
And then a final question came through on Twitter from someone asking, how could the biographic narrative therapy be implemented into clinical practice? Do you have some guidelines for that or advice?
Yeah. This is a difficult question, and we also think about this. I think during the talk I already said, looking at the situation in Germany, we mostly focus on linguistic training and speech and language therapy, and there's almost no time to include work like this biographic approach. So this was the reason why we thought, okay, maybe we can try it in support groups because this is a more flexible setting and it's easier to include it. Yeah. And here I think it's really possible to do this. But looking, for example, at the clinicians who joined our training, they, for example, use it at the beginning of a session and then they start working on the language. Or some of them told us they use it during the first 3 sessions to get to know their clients a bit better, and then maybe they return to some topics or use them even in the language training. So this might also be a possibility at the moment to integrate parts of it or principles of the program.
Yes.
In a smaller trial, we also used only the individual sessions because this is easier to integrate in Germany because we have more individual sessions than group sessions. And here we found that people also benefited from using only the individual sessions. So maybe it would also be a way if we can show this is also a good thing people can improve by using this. Maybe it would be possible to have a kind of high doses of this biography work, and then you can go on with the language training, because what we also found is that when people are more confident, then they can also respond in a better way to the linguistic training. So we're still looking for the best combination, but these might be the first steps to use parts of the program.
Great, thank you so much. And just to finish off, there were a couple of questions about whether there was a poll. So on Slido, there is room to provide feedback for our future seminars. So please feel free to fill that in next time. And if you do have any specific questions, you can always email us at aphasiacre@latrobe.edu.au, and we can probably respond to that a bit easier than via the Slido app. So thanks everyone, and thank you, Sabine.
Thank you.
Bye.